It's Christmas night, 1996, Boulder, Colorado. Snow on the ground, lights still glowing on the trees inside a big, beautiful house at 755 15th Street. And inside that house, a wealthy, picture-perfect American family is wrapping up the holiday. Kids tucked in, parents tired but happy, and by every appearance, it is a perfect evening. Except that by the next morning, a 6-year-old girl named JonBenét Ramsey is dead. And nearly 30 years later, after more than 21,000 tips, interviews across 19 states, a grand jury, multiple rounds of DNA testing, international headlines, books, documentaries, lawsuits, and one of the most catastrophically botched police investigations in American history, we still do not know who killed her. And to understand why that is, you have to start at the beginning, with the family itself, because the Ramseys were not just wealthy, they were the kind of wealthy that makes regular people uncomfortable. JonBenét Ramsey being the founder and CEO of Access Graphics, a computer technology company that crossed $1 billion in revenue in 1996, the very year his daughter was killed. And his wife Patsy, Patricia Ann Ramsey, was a former Miss West Virginia, a Miss America contestant, the engine of their social life in Boulder, a woman who filled every room she walked into, who spent thousands of dollars on JonBenét's singing and dancing lessons and custom-made pageant costumes, and who was also, quietly, fighting stage 4 ovarian cancer that she had been diagnosed with in 1993 and was in remission from by 1996. And their daughter, JonBenét, born August 6, 1990, named partly after her father in a French pronunciation, JonBenét, was by everyone's account a force, a 6-year-old with beauty queen titles already stacked up: Little Miss Colorado, Little Miss Charlevoix, Colorado State All-Star Kids Cover Girl, America's Royale Miss, National Tiny Miss Beauty, a girl who sang and danced and performed in sequined costumes with full makeup and high heels. And yes, the ethics of child pageants are a whole separate conversation, but what matters for our purposes is what those pageant photographs would do to the investigation later, because the moment those images hit television screens, this tiny blonde girl looking almost unsettlingly adult, the story exploded into something that had nothing to do with finding the killer. But we're getting ahead of ourselves, because first we need to talk about Christmas night 1996, when the Ramseys had attended a holiday party at the home of their friends Fleet and Priscilla White, had dinner, let the kids play, went home, put JonBenét to bed around 9 or 10 in the evening. Patsy later said the girl had fallen asleep in the car and she'd carried her upstairs without changing her out of her Christmas outfit, a detail that will matter. And that, by both parents' account, was the last time they saw JonBenét alive. And then, at approximately 5:52 in the morning on December 26, 1996, Patsy Ramsey walked downstairs and found 3 handwritten pages on the spiral staircase and read the first few lines and screamed because it was a ransom note, 2.5 pages long, written in black marker, opening with the line, "Mr. Ramsey, listen carefully. We are a group of individuals that represent a small foreign faction, demanding $118,000 in ransom, a very specific number that investigators would note with enormous interest was almost exactly equal to John Ramsey's Christmas bonus that year. Warning the family not to call police, saying JonBenét was safe and a call would come between 8 a.m. and 10 a.m. And Patsy immediately called 911, hysterical, barely coherent, and police arrived within minutes. And here is where everything starts to go catastrophically wrong, because the first officer who arrived did not treat the Ramsey home like a crime scene. He walked through it. He let other people walk through it. And Patsy called friends, the Whites, the Fernies, and within a couple of hours there were half a dozen people inside that house, making coffee and sitting at the kitchen table, and the Boulder
Boulder Police Department, which had almost zero experience with major homicides, failed to secure the scene, rejected offers of help from the FBI, rejected offers from the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, and sent a single detective, Linda Arndt, to manage a potential kidnapping alone, while other officers stood outside. And the 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. window came and went with no phone call, no contact, no kidnapper, because the ransom note was either a lie or a mistake. And then, at around 1 in the afternoon, Detective Arndt asked John Ramsey and his friend, Fleet White, to search the house, a task that would never be assigned to a grieving father in a legitimate investigation. And John Ramsey went to the basement, pushed open a small storage room at the back, and found his daughter on the floor, partially covered by a white blanket. And he picked her up, carried her upstairs, laid her in the living room, and pulled the tape from her mouth. And in those few moments, whatever forensic evidence existed in that room, footprints, fibers, the positioning of the body, was destroyed forever. And JonBenét's wrists had been bound above her head with cord, and there was a garrote, a white cord twisted around a broken piece of a paintbrush to create leverage, tied tightly around her neck, and her skull had been fractured with a massive 8.5-inch crack caused by a blow so severe it had caused hemorrhaging in her brain. And the medical examiner would determine she was struck first and then strangled. Cause of death listed officially as asphyxia by strangulation associated with craniocerebral trauma, and she had been dead for hours. And now the evidence, because this is where the case gets genuinely maddeningly complicated. The ransom note was written on paper from a notepad belonging to the Ramsey family, found in their kitchen, and the pen used to write it was also found in the kitchen, in Patsy's art supply kit. Meaning whoever wrote that note sat down inside this house, used this family's own materials, and wrote 2.5 pages, which is either someone who lived there or someone who had been inside that house before and knew exactly where to find those things. And handwriting analysts eliminated more than 70 people as possible authors of that note, but could never definitively say Patsy wrote it, and could never rule her out either. And the garrote was assembled from 2 components, a length of cord that did not belong to anyone in the family,
and the broken handle of a paintbrush from Patsy Ramsey's art kit, the same kit that contained the pen, and the brush itself was found in the basement with its handle snapped off, meaning someone sat down and deliberately constructed this device. This was not improvised in a panic. And the coroner found pineapple in JonBenét's digestive system, undigested, meaning she had eaten it within the last couple of hours before her death. And her parents said they hadn't given her pineapple that night, but a bowl of fresh pineapple sat on the kitchen table and it had Burke's fingerprints on it, Burke being JonBenét's 9-year-old brother. And in the basement, there was a broken window investigators believed could have been a point of entry, a break that John Ramsey himself admitted making months earlier when he'd locked himself out. And there was a scuff mark on the wall near the window that could suggest someone had climbed through it. And a small suitcase was found outside the window in the window well. And retired homicide detective Lou Smith, one of the most experienced cold case investigators in Colorado's history, later argued that this window was the killer's entry point, that the suitcase was used to climb back out, that the thick carpeting throughout the house muffled footsteps, that an experienced predator who had studied this family could have moved through the house without waking anyone. And Lou Smith also cataloged what he believed were stun gun marks on JonBenét's body, suggesting the killer had used a device to incapacitate her before moving her. And he never wavered from the intruder theory for the rest of his life, dying of cancer in 2010, still convinced the family was innocent. But the single most important piece of evidence in this entire case, the evidence that rewrote everything, was the DNA. The DNA from an unknown male was found in the crotch of JonBenét's underwear mixed with her blood. And additional touch DNA, the kind left behind by skin cells, was later recovered from the waistband of her long underwear, and both samples matched the same unidentified male profile. And that DNA did not match John Ramsey, did not match Burke Ramsey, did not match Patsy Ramsey, did not match Fleet White,
did not match any law enforcement officer who had handled the body or any other individual connected to the scene. It matched nobody in any database, and it still matches nobody today. And now let's talk about suspects, because the Boulder Police Department from day one, and this is not an exaggeration, treated John and Patsy Ramsey as the primary suspects, which was not an irrational starting point, given that statistically, when a child is killed, the killer is almost always within the family. And the theory that circulated through the department was that something had happened that night, an accident, a punishment that went wrong, and the Ramseys had staged the scene, written the ransom note, fashioned the garrote from Patsy's own supplies, and called 911 in the morning to play the role of grieving parents. And this theory gained enormous traction, publicly and in the media. But the theory has one problem that cannot be argued away, which is the DNA, the unknown male DNA that does not belong to anyone in that family. And supporters of the family theory have argued the DNA could be contamination from a factory worker who made the underwear or someone who handled the clothing in a store. And while that is technically possible, it is an extraordinarily convenient explanation that dismisses the most concrete physical evidence in the entire case in order to preserve a theory that the physical evidence does not support. And John and Patsy Ramsey spent years fighting the cloud of suspicion, cooperating with investigators, then refusing to when they felt the police weren't acting in good faith, hiring lawyers, giving interviews, writing a book, suing tabloids, and they were never charged. And Patsy Ramsey died of ovarian cancer in June 2006 at 49, having spent the last decade of her life as the prime suspect in her own daughter's murder, never having been charged, never having been convicted. And in 2008, the Boulder County District Attorney formally exonerated the entire Ramsey family based on the DNA evidence and sent them a written apology that Patsy Ramsey never got to read. And then there was Burke, JonBenét's 9-year-old brother, who was investigated and cleared by police in 1999, whose DNA did not match the unknown profile, against whom there was never any physical evidence. And yet in 2016, CBS aired a documentary series that implied Burke had struck JonBenét
with a flashlight during a dispute over pineapple and that the parents had covered it up. And it was compelling television, built on behavioral analysis and reimagined crime scene reconstruction. And Burke Ramsey sued CBS for $750 million in defamation, and the case settled in 2019 on undisclosed terms that his attorney described as satisfactory. And then there was John Mark Carr, the most dramatic and humiliating episode in the entire investigation. A 41-year-old American teacher living in Bangkok, Thailand, who in August 2006 contacted investigators and confessed to the murder, claiming he had drugged and sexually assaulted JonBenét before accidentally killing her. And he was arrested and extradited to the United States in a global media circus that broke into regular television programming. And then his DNA came back and it didn't match, not even remotely. And there were no drugs found in JonBenét's system, contradicting his story. And investigators couldn't place him in Boulder on the night in question, and he was released. And investigators later concluded he was a deeply disturbed man who had been obsessing over the case for years and had fabricated the confession entirely because he wanted to be part of the story. And through all of this, the investigation itself was falling apart at a structural level, because the Boulder Police Department and the District Attorney's Office, under Alex Hunter, were running essentially competing investigations out of the same jurisdiction. The police building a case against the Ramseys, while the DA's office brought in its own investigators, including Lou Smith, who reached completely different conclusions. And the two agencies were not sharing information cleanly, and neither trusted the other.
And in 1998, a grand jury was convened that spent nearly a year hearing evidence, and in 1999 voted to indict John and Patsy Ramsey on charges of child abuse resulting in death and hindering the investigation of an unknown killer. And District Attorney Alex Hunter declined to sign the indictment, citing insufficient evidence, and that decision remained secret, hidden under seal, until 2013, when a judge ordered it unsealed, meaning the public did not know for 14 years that a grand jury had voted to charge the Ramseys. And whether Hunter made the right call or protected a powerful family is debated to this day, though the most charitable interpretation is that he looked at a contaminated crime scene, a contested ransom note, no confirmed murder weapon, and concluded a trial would end in acquittal, which would be worse than no trial at all. And while all of this legal maneuvering was happening, the media was turning JonBenét's death into something grotesque. Because the moment those pageant photographs hit television screens, the 6-year-old in full makeup, in sequins, performing on stage, cable news discovered that there was enormous appetite for this story, and that appetite had almost nothing to do with justice and everything to do with spectacle. And the tabloids published unverified allegations, speculation, leaked information, and outright fabrications, named suspects without evidence, printed theories as facts, and the Ramseys sued and won and sued again. And the coverage contaminated the investigation by putting police under pressure to make a quick arrest, and by influencing public opinion so thoroughly that many Americans simply assumed the family was guilty before a single charge had ever been filed. And this institutionalized assumption drove investigative resources in a direction that may have allowed the actual killer to walk free, while an innocent family was destroyed publicly. And the ransom note itself deserves its own reckoning, because it is one of the strangest documents in American criminal history. 2.5 pages, written in the family's own kitchen with the family's own materials, opening with movie dialogue phrasing about a small foreign faction, demanding a ransom amount that matched John Ramsey's bonus almost exactly, containing the phrase "and hence," an unusual and somewhat formal construction, written with apparent literacy and deliberateness by someone who took their time in a house where they could have been caught at any moment. And handwriting analysts studied it for decades, linguists analyzed it, researchers compared it to writing samples from dozens of people, and nothing definitive ever emerged. The note remains officially authorless to this day. And now we arrive at where the case actually stands. Because it is 2026, nearly 30 years since JonBenét was killed, and the Boulder Police Department has followed more than 21,000 tips and traveled to 19 states and interviewed more than 1,000 individuals. And in December 2023, they convened the Colorado Cold Case Review Team, a panel of outside experts brought in to review the investigation and recommend next steps.
In 2024, they digitized the entire case file into a searchable database. And in November 2024, Netflix released a 3-part documentary called Cold Case: Who Killed JonBenét Ramsey, directed by Joe Berlinger, featuring extensive interviews with John Ramsey, now 80 years old, who told CNN that his biggest frustration from day one was that the police did not have the capacity or the capability or the experience to handle this case, a frustration that has clearly not softened in 30 years. And the technology that now offers the greatest hope is investigative genetic genealogy, the same methodology that identified the Golden State Killer in 2018 and has cracked dozens of cold cases across the country, where the unknown DNA profile is uploaded to genealogy databases and matched to distant relatives whose family trees are then traced forward to identify living individuals who could be the source of the original sample.
And John Ramsey has been pushing loudly for this to be applied to his daughter's case, submitting a formal petition to the Colorado governor in 2022 asking for an independent agency to take over DNA testing decisions. And the Boulder PD insists it is using every available tool. And something between those two positions is clearly not connecting, because the technology exists, the DNA exists, the method has worked on comparable cases, and JonBenét's killer has not been identified. And the questions that remain are this: who wrote the ransom note using this family's own materials and knew their exact Christmas bonus figure? Who fashioned a garrote from a paintbrush handle found in Patsy Ramsey's art kit? Why did JonBenét eat pineapple in the hours before her death when her parents say they didn't give it to her? Whose unidentified male DNA is on her body and clothing, and why has it never been matched? Why has genetic genealogy not been applied decisively? And most importantly, where is the person who did this? Because someone killed JonBenét Ramsey. Someone walked into that house or was already inside it and committed one of the most brutal crimes imaginable against a 6-year-old child. And that person has lived for nearly 30 years knowing what they did, watching the documentaries, reading the coverage, watching a family get dragged through public suspicion for something the physical evidence suggests they didn't do. And that person has a name, and they have a family and a life that looks normal from the outside. And the DNA knows who they are. The DNA has always known who they are. We just have not found them yet. And JonBenét Ramsey was 6 years old. She liked to sing. She liked to dance. She had a big smile and her whole life in front of her. And she was killed in the basement of her own home on the night after Christmas, and nobody has ever been held responsible for that. And that is not acceptable, and that is not something any of us should be comfortable with. And if you know anything at all about what happened to JonBenét Ramsey, the Boulder Police Department tip line is open at Boulder's Most Wanted at bouldercolorado.gov, or you can call 303-411-1974, because nearly 30 years is too long, and JonBenét deserved better, and the case is still open.